Welcome everyone to another episode of the Runners Roundtable, where in season 4, I'm speaking to different inspiring female runners about the running community and about how they're changing the running industry, the face of running, what we know about running in their own unique way. And today I'm joined by Ally. Oh my gosh. I was so worried I was going to mess up your name because I was like, my Spanish tongue cannot wrap its mouth. Like it just, like I was even before I even do the introduction, I was like, I'm going to mess up her business name because my tongue wants to say something else. So Ally Brettnacher is here with me
Yay.
today. And you can tell truly, before I started recording, I was saying, so Ally is the founder of Athlete Bouquets, and I was repeating the word bouquet out loud. I can't even tell you at least 5 times because I'm like, why does my mouth have so much trouble formulating that word? And I just came back to, I'm like, it's because Spanish is my first language. And I see bouquet and I want to
Mm.
say bouquet. Like it's such
Ooh,
a it's such a
I kind of like
challenging
that.
word for me. It's a challenge. I'm glad you like that because my brain was having so much trouble saying the name. So try to say this is great, y'all. This is part of what happens to our bilingual brains, that certain words are just really, for some reason, really challenging to say. So Ally Brettnacher, you are here with me today, and I found out about you from Cindy Smith. So shout out Cindy of Pen and
Oh.
Paces, because you two recorded a podcast, and I was like, wait a minute, who is this woman? And I'm all about women, business women, entrepreneurs, supporting other women to be their best. Like if we can amplify one another, even if we're selling similar product or we're offering similar services, the ability to support one another only helps everyone grow. And
Mm.
so I saw you two and I was like, okay, I'm going to follow her. And then I'm going to ask her if she'd be willing to be on the podcast because your business is also something that I haven't really seen, or maybe my eyes just haven't caught on. So now that I've messed up your name, explain to everyone how much trouble I had with saying your business name, can you introduce yourself to us and tell us how you got into running? And then we'll go into the business side of things after that.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me here, Stephanie. I'm so excited. And you're not the only one who can't say bouquets. My husband actually calls, what does he call it? He calls athlete bouquets, he calls it athletic boutiques, is what he calls it. So you're not alone. He has trouble. I feel like bouquets is kind of a strange word, but it describes what I do, which I know we'll get into. But thanks for having me. I am Ally Brettnacher, and I started my running journey in 2007. I ran my first half marathon. And after that, really was hooked. I didn't like running growing up. I was a soccer player and didn't really like the mile warm up, was like the worst part of the whole practice. But after and in college is when I really got into running. So today I've run 7 or 8. Wait, is it 7? 7 full marathons and over 50 half marathons. I am from Carmel, Indiana, which is a suburb of Indianapolis, Indiana. So Midwest through and through. A mom of 2 girls, just like you are, Stephanie. And mine are 6 and 2.5, going on like 17. She is crazy. And then I'm also married. My husband and I will celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary next year. So I'm, as you mentioned, also a business owner. I have Athlete Bouquets, which is a gifting business for runners. But I always like to say that I'm a recovering software salesperson. So before I started Athlete Bouquets, I was in software sales for almost a decade. So my background's really a technology nerd, and my husband's still in technology. So very much still a technology nerd. But thanks again for for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being here and thanks for sharing that your husband also can't say it 'cause
Yeah.
I'm really just I'm just laughing at myself right now. Which is great because I always say that as long as I can make myself laugh, I know everything's going to be okay. Like I know life is going to continue on and it's going to be okay. So, you ran your first half in 2007. At what point in the following 13 years or so did you think, oh, there's a business idea here? Let me pursue that.
Yeah. So it was, I feel like a lot of businesses came out of the pandemic, which is a silver lining of COVID. So that's what happened for me. I was pregnant with our second daughter. We had just gone through 2020 and I was feeling the burnout really, really hard. I was not happy at my job. And my husband is like, what are you doing? Why are we doing this? If you're so unhappy, why don't we take a step back? And it was really scary to think about leaving my job for the first time without having another job lined up. But like I said, I was pregnant. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just take a step back, have this baby, take a maternity leave, and then go back into the workforce, right? Well, fast forward, I quit my job and was just scrolling through Instagram, and I saw this bouquet of actual like live flowers that somebody had put goo energy gels in. And I think it was for a get well something. And I looked at it, I was like, that is so cute. What a good idea to, make something for a runner. Oh, and the flowers were in a running shoe.
Okay.
So that kind of sparked this idea of, is there a gift out there that's like for a runner, for a race that has all like goodies in it? Like think of edible arrangements, right? Where you can send somebody a bouquet of strawberries or whatever. And combine that with the fact that I had gotten flowers actually from one of my very best friends for my second Chicago marathon. She got me a bouquet of flowers. And I still to this day remember how supported that made me feel. She wasn't a runner and she knew it was a big deal and celebrated that with me. And so, kind of those things combined, I started looking and I couldn't find anything like that. So, I started ordering stuff on Amazon and putting a prototype together and texting my running friends being like, would you like this? What else would you want in it? How much would you pay to send this to somebody?
Mhm.
And then it kind of just went from there. So I opened an Etsy shop in January of 2021. And I think it was later that year or the year following. I also have a website now. So that's primarily where you find me is now athletebouquets.com.
That's amazing
Yeah.
because you were pregnant. And I'm like, that's always something that not a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people, but a lot of people slow down and don't start anything new and they don't launch businesses when they're pregnant. And yet you did it and you're here now. And I'm just curious if you've taken that time to kind of celebrate yourself of here's this moment when I'm transitioning big in life, welcoming a new family, and then I'm also birthing a new business and putting something out into the world that doesn't exist quite in the way that you're putting it out.
Stephanie, you're the first person to say that to me, actually. So this right here is the first time I'm actually thinking about that fact because it's kind of my personality that I don't really like to sit still or slow down. I think that's probably a runner thing too. Like we can all appreciate that. It's hard to go on those easy runs sometimes. But yeah, I didn't really think about that. What's funny is I was actually invited to be featured in a magazine. And I remember sending pictures where I wasn't like, I didn't want them to necessarily know I was pregnant because in my Brian, I was like, if they know I'm pregnant, they're not going to want, because what if I'm not able to fill orders, or whatever, because I'm having this baby. And it was funny. I ended up telling this journalist, she's like, oh, we don't, whatever. We just want to promote you. Like whatever happens is whatever. But it's so funny. I never really thought about it. And pregnancy, and we can choose to get into this at some point or not, but like was not easy for me either. So yeah, I don't know how I did it. And I remember being scared a little bit, but also like, well, is what it is. And I want to do this. And here we go.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get into pregnancy and even just explore. You started running in 2007. So you've got this lifetime, let's call it a lifetime, right? There's this one version of you that ran before having kids,
Hmm.
that I'm going to assume ran between kids, and then you ran after kids. But again, you're kind of running as this thing that's seeing you through these different life transitions, but it's also taking on a new meaning in your life as now you are a running business, in addition
Hmm.
to being a runner, a mother runner, any of those other labels. So I'm curious, how did pregnancy affect you in those areas?
Yeah. So when I was pregnant with my first daughter, she was born in 2017, and it was pretty traumatic, to say the least. She was born early, and so she was in the NICU, thankfully only for about a week, but I was also really sick, really, really sick. And so recovering from that was different than just, having a baby and like getting back at it slowly. It took me longer to recover. But being that athlete and having that like competitive mindset, I I was ready to challenge myself as a mom. I wanted to find myself again, right? I feel like that's something you try to grasp, this identity of who you are now, but also keep who you were before when you become a mom. And so I ran, she was born in July of 2017, and I ran the New York City Marathon in November of 2018. So not 2017, but that following year, right? And I'm trying to remember when I ran my first half after she was born. I think it was not until she wasn't a year old yet, but it wasn't that year. Like I gave myself, but I ran while I was pregnant. My husband and I ran, he like had shirts made that was like baby on board, like pointing to me, right? And I was really pregnant running this half marathon, which looking back here, like, what was I thinking? But also at the finish of that marathon, there was another really pregnant lady. And I tried to race her and did not succeed. But anyway, but I feel like, even when you become a mom, the same parts of you still exist. And so I wanted to make sure that I still had that. And I kind of did the same thing when I was pregnant with my second. And again, when Athlete Bouquets was born, I was really anxious about the pregnancy because of what had happened with my first. And yeah, that's actually when I went on medication for that I'm still on to this day. But yeah, it was a tough time. And, after that, again, it's like, okay, when can I run my first race and like get back? I gave myself more grace the second time. But yeah, then I ran the Indy Monumental last November, just to kind of prove, okay, I'm a mom of two and I can still do this. So sorry, that was a lot. I didn't even really take a breath. So I will pause.
No, I mean, keep talking. I'm just kind of taking notes because I wrote this down, and I want to highlight it for everyone, because the people who listen to this are predominantly women, ladies, and you said the same parts of you still exist. And I find that to be such profound words, particularly when we're talking about motherhood and when we're talking about how running intersects with that. And I try to explain that to people, that running is something that takes up time in your life. And because it's taking up time in your life, it is taking away time from something else. And I know for myself, when I first started running, very different from you, where I started running 6 months postpartum. So I didn't even know, I had no clue what I was doing. I just knew that I could put my kids in the
Wow.
stroller. Yeah. I just knew that I could put my kids in a stroller and we could go out and run. And that was something I could easily do with them. And I just remember having so much guilt on those first few runs without them, and guilt when I ran
Mm.
on Saturday mornings to do my long run and I left my husband. So I would do my runs and then I would rush home because I just felt so
Mhm.
guilty that time was being taken away from my children because I was doing this quote unquote selfish act of running. So I'm curious for yourself, did that ever come up for you? And if so, how did you change that story for yourself?
Mm. Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, it's such a hard thing, that mom guilt, because it's hard to shut off, right? But I've seen, I don't know if it's memes is the right, but like quotes or whatever, where it's like, I am a better mom when I run, right? Like it's like I need to do that so that I don't lose my lose my cool, right?
Yeah.
It's so, and I don't know where I first saw that or when that first came into my brain, but when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's right. I am a better human being after I've had a run. And so I know that when I think of it that way, it's for everybody else. It's not just for me, right? Because I want to be the best version of myself. And the way that I do that is through running. So, do I still have guilt? Yes. This actually last week, we had to reschedule this interview because my kid was sick. And of course, I was out on my long run when the school called. So, I felt so bad because I left, I said to my husband, "Hey, is there anything I can do for you today? I'm getting ready to head on my run." He's like, "No, I just got a busy morning." So I come back to a sick kid on the couch and I felt so guilty because he had to leave his corporate important job that, is supporting our family to go get our kid because I was out running. So it's not to say that, I can rephrase it and I don't ever feel guilty because I still do. But, you know, self-care isn't selfish. I think Robin Arzon from Peloton says that. And in her book, it says that. And so I love reading that book too to my kids so they know you got to take care of yourself, not just not just others.
Yeah, and I think that's another side of the mom guilt that you're saying, and I'm going to call it out. And you can tell me, Stephanie, you're wrong. But for me, in my experience, part of the mom guilt is also when I'm not the one there to do the thing, right? So, like, whenever my husband's the one that answers a phone call from school, I feel guilty. And I'm like, but wait a minute, that's the one that I chose to have kids with. Like, this is part of
Yeah.
his responsibility as well, that's why I chose you to parent with, so that if I couldn't do it,
Mhm.
I have so much confidence that you can do it. And it's really interesting because now my daughters are older, they're 13 and 11, and for them,
Okay.
they're so used to it being me that if it's anybody else, it actually starts to cause a little bit anxiety. And my daughters lately, which
Mm.
just cracks me up so much, but it's so unfounded. They have developed this fear that I'm going to forget them, and I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm gonna forget you. Like, I'm always there. I'm always the one to
Mm.
take you to school. I'm always the one to pick you up." But they're so used to it that if there's a change to that, they think there's something wrong with me or that I'm gonna forget them. And I'm like, no, it's okay. So I realize again, as my kids are getting older, I'm like, oh, I actually need to start asking for help more often or start allowing
Mm.
other people to do things, because if not, they're adding an element to the guilt, like this outside voice to the guilt that I already have internally of you forgot me. You're
Mhm.
forgetting me. And I'm like, I'm not forgetting. I'm five. It happened 2 weeks ago where I picked up my daughter 5 minutes, my oldest daughter, 5 minutes later than what I normally do. And she got in the car and she's like, "So you
Mm.
forgot about me today?" And I'm like, "I didn't forget about you. Literally 5 minutes later, like maybe I'm the 50th car in line versus being the 10th car, but I'm still there." And that's something like even that comment where I'm like, oh man, I already feel guilty. And now you're saying this thing and you're adding to that
Yeah.
guilt, not intentionally. So that's just another element to the
Mhm.
guilt that I feel like we often don't talk about. There's this internal feeling, and then there's the expectations of others as
Yeah.
well, or even
Uh,
it's so
mhm.
weird. So I think, for those people who are listening to us that are moms, what would you say to them?
Yeah. Man. Well, it's crazy because what you just said, my daughter's going through this forgetting phase too. Like she thinks I'm gonna leave her at night. When I put her to bed, she's like, "Are you gonna leave?" Like, no, where am I gonna go? So anyway, but yeah, those moms, man, it's hard because no matter what I say, a lot of it I'm saying to myself too. It's not like, I've had this all figured out. Nobody does.
Mm-mm.
And so I think maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I say. Nobody has it figured out. Right? Like we're all in this together. Everybody, if you're struggling with somebody else is too. You're not alone in this journey of motherhood. And you mentioned too, Stephanie, like asking for help, letting other people do more. I actually had a conversation with my mom this morning. She's recovering from back surgery and she's like, I've realized I offered to help her wrap Christmas present. And she's like, you know what? Usually I would say no because I could do it. She's like, but yeah, I would really love your help. So even, my mom is still learning that, right? So it's something that's hard. And I'm also a control freak. So for the other control freaks out there, I know it's hard to like let your husband do things. My poor husband tried to cook dinner last night and he put grilled chicken in like a glass baking pan and he put the Brussels sprouts and the carrots just on top with no seasoning. And he put it in the oven. And I came in and I had to fix it. But it's like, could I have held back and just been like, thank you so much for making dinner. This is great. Yes. But sometimes it's hard. But yeah, I think just know you're not alone and everybody is in the same boat. We're all trying to figure it out. Nobody is perfect.
Yeah. So how did you make time for running in that? I guess just how are you making time for running now?
Well, you talk about guilt. This is still something I'm working through and something I often talk to my therapist about. And so both of my girls, so even though I work for myself, both of my girls are out of the house all day. So my oldest is in kindergarten now. She goes to public school. She stays at after school care. And then my 2.5-year-old is at daycare every day. And my husband, again, has a nice corporate job. He works from home. So I feel really guilty about that, actually, having my girls out of the house. Cause part of my brain is like, shouldn't I be a stay at home mom with my younger one? Like, shouldn't I have her at home? I shouldn't send my other one to after school care because, maybe other parents need that and I'm taking up a spot. But then I have to remind myself, no, like it's not like I'm sitting at home watching Netflix. Like I am working from the moment they're out of this house until the moment I pick them up. And maybe I'm doing some, laundry and grocery and yada yada, but I'm still working. And so it's really hard for me though. I still feel a lot of guilt and I talk to my husband about it as often as I can because I don't want him to think that I'm not, I want to make sure we're still in a good place where, there's a partnership here and I'm still working. I'm not just again, like watching Netflix or messing around. But that's how I'm able to make time for running. I am so fortunate that I don't have to get up at 5 a.m. before everyone's awake and do it. There's been moments in my life and seasons of my life where that's the case. That is the only time it fits. That's when it happens. Now I have my sports bra on under this and I have my running shorts on. So after we're done here, I'm going to go down in the basement and knock out my run because it's really cold and windy and icy today. So I'm not going outside. But anyway, so it's just, that's my season of life right now. And will there be another season where I have to get up at 5 a.m. to fit things in? Maybe, maybe not. But yeah, I think, all of us, again, you can't compare yourself to other people because you may not know what season of life they're in or what's going on in their life. So
I appreciate that so much because I was you. And
mm,
when the girls were younger, I mean, they went to school. As soon as I could get my kids in school, they were in school. And I was a quote unquote stay-at-home mom. In their first years, I was going to school. So I was getting one of my master's degrees. And I they would go to school and I would stay home and I would prepare for school, I would get dinner ready, I would do the groceries.
Mhm.
So it's like for me, it was always I had so much guilt over being a stay-at-home mom, but I'm like, I'm not sitting around doing any like I'm doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I am non-stop. And then as they got older, they continued on in school. But then as I grew in my business, I realized and I wrote it down because I'm like, oh, I want to make sure we talk about this where there's so much invisible labor that comes with being
Mm.
a small business owner, right? You're looking at an
Mm.
Instagram page and you think that's all it is. And it's like, no, there's emails, there's research. I feel like I wear a research hat 50% of the time. And by that, I'm saying I'm
Mhm.
constantly researching what other people, just what is the business landscape? What am I doing? Is that something that interests me? Is this something that I want to offer to the people who, take my yoga classes or who are interested in run coaching? Or even just, the other day, I spent time creating an end of the year questionnaire to send to all of my athletes. And it's like, no one sees
Mm.
that. Like that stuff doesn't just come out of thin air. It is actually something that
Mhm.
there's very intentional time that's given to that, but you don't see it. And I find that
Yeah.
that's something that people it's the same thing. I mean, I remember just having such an issue with it in terms of like the stay-at-home mom piece, because people just assumed I did nothing. And I'm like, no, I'm nonstop. And even so, and I'm gonna make an assumption here, another assumption, you can kind of correct me, where I would assume that a lot of your work happens between school hours, right? Like you're making sure to kind of get
Mhm.
the runs, the work, everything done so that when the kids are home, you're able to be present with them. You're able to spend that
Yep.
time with them. And that's a hard choice too, because again, for me, that's kind of how I operate. And this invisible labor of there are times where my daughters don't really understand what I do because I try to do so much when they're
Yeah.
not around. So that when I'm with them, I'm with them. But that ends up creating, or it has created for me, if I take a phone call in the evenings, which happens once in a blue moon, my daughters
Mm.
are like, "You're not spending time with us. What's wrong? You
Yeah.
haven't spent time with us." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I'm with you all the time." Like, if I need 1 hour in the evening to do something, it should be okay. You've got
Yeah.
your dad. Go be with your dad. So, I guess it's just, can you explain to people who are not familiar with your business, what are the elements of the business that
Mm.
we may not see when we go to the Instagram account and we just see photos? Like what else goes into athlete bouquets?
Man. Well, there's always, and you can probably appreciate this, there's always this invisible list that's in my brain. Like, oh, I need to do this, this, and this. And then I try to write it down. It's like, okay, I need to do, the podcast schedule. I've got end of year stuff to do. I've got, I like to do some reporting at end of year to figure out, okay, what am I going to focus on next year? What were the best selling products? What designs don't I have? And then you have to set aside time for design. And I was actually talking to Cindy Smith about that from Pen and Paces. I'm like, how do you figure out when you do things, like what works well for you with time management? Because yeah, I might block off an hour on my calendar, but then I just start to ignore that after a while, right? So just trying to figure out, just okay, and then man, okay, this collection for this race doesn't have this product, so I need to make sure that I create that. But then I have to design it. What am I going to put it on? Got to take pictures, upload it, make sure it's everywhere. Did I post about it on Instagram yet? Like it's just this constant thing. Do I have enough boxes? Do I need to order more boxes? How am I doing on this inventory? I thought I ordered more of that. Did I forget? Like it's just always. And my brain, I don't know if this is a female thing, right? Because you see again, like memes or videos of dads just being like, the mom is like thinking all these things and the dad's just in la la land, like just enjoying life. What's that like? Um, so yeah, it's just tough. It's hard to shut that off. And I think that's one of the hard things too about working for yourself or just working a job that doesn't stop, right? It's hard to compartmentalize. And truly be, when you're with your kids, be with your kids and not be thinking about, or like scrolling through Instagram and like thinking about things that need to happen. It's like, okay, I have these hours during the day to do that. But yeah, it's really hard.
I
Yeah.
had there was a few months ago with my own therapist where she's like, all right, let's come up with the pillars. So for me, pillars are really big. And I had my pillars of training, pillars of life, pillars of whatever. So I had come up with my 7 day pillars, essentially, like here's the Monday pillar, here's the Tuesday pillar, third, the entire
Mm,
week. Because at that point, I felt like I was all over the place. Like I was posting
mm,
erratically, or I was writing on the blog erratically. And I had to take a step back and figure out, okay, so what is the message that I'm trying to put out? And how can I organize myself in a way so that I don't feel like I'm spilling out all the time? And
mhm,
let me tell you, it worked until life happened, and then those pillars went bye-bye. But for a time there, Monday was my administrative day, right? Monday is when I did
yeah.
the bookkeeping stuff, when I did, well, Monday, yeah. So I did emails. For that time period, I had an away message on some of my emails with, I'll get back to you on a Tuesday. Like I check my
Right.
emails once a week on a Tuesday. And again, that was during that season of life. It was easy enough for me to say Tuesdays because it just made the most sense in terms of like, all right, on
Mhm,
Tuesday. And it took me looking at what are the patterns in my life? Like, what are the days where I have more energy to sit at a computer and work versus what are the days
mhm,
where I need to kind of be up and about? And it was that I had Mondays, my administrative days. I think Thursday was the research day. Like, that's the day where and for me, research could be anything, listening to podcasts, reading some,
mhm,
like, that was the research. Or yeah, reading books was a pretty big one. I'm like looking at my books here where it was like those were the days that maybe I was looking into reading different running books and different training approaches. Or if it was yoga, reading about the Yoga Sutras. That was kind of the day where I was like, okay, so how am I educating myself? How am I growing? And again, it worked really well until life happened, and all of a sudden
mm,
things changed. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to get back to my pillars where I know what to expect and on what days to expect. And then also to not overbook myself. Because I've tried what you said of like, oh, here's an hour that I'm
mm,
going to block off. And then that hour may turn into 2 hours, may turn into 3 hours, or it may just turn into something where I'm like, I'm not feeling doing that today. It's not going to work.
yeah.
And I think
Mhm,
that's something that every business person has to figure out what works for them and how much,
mhm.
I guess, flexibility they need. So if someone were to come to you and say, Allie, how are you doing this business thing? What would you tell them?
Oh, yeah, I like to call myself a chronic overscheduler. Somebody used that term and I was like, that is me. I will fill my plate until, and usually it's my husband's the voice of reason who's the first to notice, like, you gotta, something's gotta give here. You gotta drop something. Like, yeah, there are times in especially in the season because I'm like, ooh, I'm not working a normal job, so I'm just gonna keep doing all these other things. Well, now I've gotten good at saying no again. Like, no, I'm not gonna do this. I can't. So that I have the time to really give to my business because it's hard to sit down and strategize, get things done if you're out having coffee 10 times a week. Like I love grabbing coffee, grabbing lunch, like being with people. But I find that if I start doing that, like I'm already doing it for the beginning of the year, I've already started overscheduling myself. I mean, for this week, after I have vacation and then I have a procedure, nothing major, actually to fix my breathing, hopefully. And then that week after that, I'm like, okay, that's when I'm going to schedule. That's when I'll be back. And that week is already nuts. I'm already having anxiety about that week. And I'm like, why are you doing this to yourself? You have complete control. So I think this goes back to the advice of talking to parents, right? It's like nobody knows, nobody has it all together.
Mm.
And I think, like you said earlier, Stephanie, it's this like invisible labor. Like, how are you doing it? Well, I am trying to do my best to say no to things that don't need to happen right now. I try at the beginning of the week to get all the administrative stuff out of the way at the beginning of the week. Laundry, groceries, done right away. Don't have to worry about that. And then what are my priorities? And just knock them off one at a time. And the other thing is, one of my favorite running mantras is also one of my favorite life mantras, which is run the mile you're in. So when I start to get overwhelmed, which is definitely happening this time of year, especially during the holidays, so we'll be past that by the time this comes out. But it's like take it one day at a time, and 1 hour at a time if you have to too. So yeah, I mean it's not easy, that's for sure. But in order to get it done, like you have to kind of take a step back, prioritize like one step at a time.
Yeah, I love that because I'm someone who I've realized this about myself, particularly as I've grown in my role within my business. And I just mean in terms of like really stepping into being a business owner. I was someone who businesswoman, right? So I was someone who I didn't want to own my own business. I didn't want to do any of that. That's I went to school. My educational background, my work background is in mental health therapy. And when I was in school and when I was doing therapy, it was very much so of like, oh, if you want to make money as a therapist, private practice. And I remember thinking, I don't want private
Mm.
practice. I don't want to be responsible for rent. Like, I just want to show up and do the therapy and leave. And I remember feeling that. And now I look back to that previous version of myself who said that, and I just laugh. And I'm like, oh, girl, you have no clue the ride that you're going to go on to in life because you are going to own your own business and you are going to do your own thing. And it's going to be hard because the amount of flexibility that in and of itself can get very overwhelming because I'll look at my calendar and I'm like, oh, look at all this free time that I have. And it's like, it's not free time. Like it's, you got to leave
No.
time open for when a lot of last minute things pop up, or even your example of when we initially had this scheduled where it's like you have to leave enough time open so that if something happens with your kid, you can be there for it,
Yeah.
right? Like you can be there
Mm-hmm.
for your child, you can go to the doctor's appointment or you can whatever. And I know there are working parents that do that as well, but I just find that for myself, working for myself means I have so much flexibility that I actually don't have as much flexibility as I think I do because
Mm.
I tend to fill that time with things to do. And the things always take up more time because, at least for me, once I start to go down one rabbit hole, I'm like, wait, I need to kind of see this to completion before I can move on. So for me, it's, I guess what I'm trying
Mhm.
to say is that I like the structure, but I don't like rigidity and routine. And
Mm.
that's something
Mhm.
that's really, it's been really hard for me to accept, which is why those pillars worked. But then it just became so rigid where I'm like, oh, every Monday is administrative day. Like it's nice for the rest of the week, but it's also like, what if I don't want to do this administrative stuff? What if I don't want to prepare my taxes or end of the year reports or send out the emails? What if I don't want to do those on those days?
Mhm.
So um the question that I have for you now is, what do you hope your daughters see from you? What's the example that you're setting for them? And when they go out into the world and they say, my mom is, what do you hope that
Mm.
sentence completes with?
Well, I will answer that, but first, I would be remiss if I didn't give credit to my mom. So, She will probably listen to this. So, hey, mom. She herself was an entrepreneur, started a software business before I was born, taught herself how to code. My dad quit his job, joined her, and they ran a business for 2 decades, had over 100 employees, sold the business. So when I look at what example I want to set for my kids, I look to my mom, right? And those are big ass shoes to fill. And so to your point, like I I kind of always thought I would have a business, frankly, because it's in my DNA. But I also felt like pressure that I made up. Like my parents gave me no pressure whatsoever to like have a technology business, right? And so even now I feel like, oh, is my business like a real business compared, right? But you can't compare yourself to others. So anyway, so first I give credit to my mom. Now to answer your question, I I want them to know, like, they would say, I bet you if you ask them that question, like my mom, they probably say my mom is a runner. That's probably what they would say. So I've set that example very well. Like I put on like workout clothes and my 2.5-year-old will be like, Mommy, you running? Mommy running? Yep. Mommy's running. Like they get it. They see me do that. And, you know, my oldest, I went down to do a workout in the basement over the weekend and she was like, can I please come down with you? I want to do a workout too. You know, I mean, they're very much, they see it. And that makes me so proud. When my husband brings them to the finish line, that make, you know, I just love that they can see that and not just see me, but see other runners, see the community. And I want them to know that I'm really strong
Mm.
too. Like, you know, my oldest especially, like she said this to me, and I swear I want to write a children's book called My Mom Can Carry Two Suitcases, because she said this and was like bragging to her friend. And she was like, my mom can carry two suitcases. And I thought it was so funny, but so profound at the same time, right? Like I want her to look at me and know, yeah, I can carry two suitcases. Or like the weights I have in our gym downstairs. Like, are those your weights, mom, or are those dad's weights? And I'm like, no, those are mommy's weights. Like, mommy can lift those. And so I just want them to know I'm strong. Like, my mom is strong. And it's confusing for them to explain what I do for a living. And they do go through things at school, right? Where it's like, what do your parents do? And my oldest came home and asked me, what do you do, mom, while I'm at school? Right? I'm like, mommy makes gifts for runners. Easy enough. But for other people, that's confusing. They're like,
Yeah.
what?
I mean,
So, yeah.
I was going to say it is confusing. And I find that with my daughters, it's like this year, there was, I believe it was in my oldest daughter's class, where they kind of went around and they said what each parent did for work. And I was like, well, what did you say about me?
Yeah.
Because it's, and for me, it's not, I feel like it's not really simple what I do because there's so many different elements. Like I'm a very visual person. I have to write things down. I have to like see it. And that was kind of an assignment I gave myself over the summer of, can I draw out everything that I do and like how does it all connect, right? Like
Mm.
how does the run coaching, teaching yoga, retreats, and even here I'm like looking at my binders and I'm like, okay, so then there's like 5 different things there and it all comes together to what I do. But even for myself, I have trouble defining what I do, right? Like I have trouble saying,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it is this one thing when it's like, it's not really that one thing because it's even just, and we're kind of in it, right? Where we have these running businesses, but then we're also runners ourselves. And we share quite a bit of that running journey that we have on Instagram. And that becomes part of the business
Mm-hmm.
too, right? Like it's not, and that's something
Mm-hmm.
too that I try to explain to people that when you are a business, an entrepreneur, particularly I think within this fitness, wellness, running space, you yourself are also the product, right? Like people are buying into
Mm-hmm.
what your story is and into who you are as an athlete. And that to me, at least I think about that where I'm like, oh, that's another layer to all of this, right? It's like
Mm,
you, and I'm going to shout out your Instagram accounts, right? Like you had a PR earlier this year, and
mm,
like not too long ago, earlier this year, but you just recently had a
yeah.
PR, right? And when that got posted on Instagram, it got posted to both your accounts. It got posted to the
Mm,
athlete boutiques and then to your Ally account. And it's like, because it's you, right? Like it's not just
mhm.
here's a boutique. You see, it's not just
Yeah,
here's a
it's fine. I
bouquet,
just
but it's also like it's you. And I guess I'm curious, how do you navigate all of that? Of yes, here's this business, but then my story, my personal story is still very much so a part of, I don't wanna say the product because I don't like to think of like, "Oh, it's a product." Like, no, I feel like when people buy something
Mm,
from you or they buy something from a small business, they're buying a piece of you. They're buying a piece of your
mhm.
creativity and your creation and the love that you put. Because I'm making an assumption that it's not like you just throw things together and say, "Okay, here out into the world."
Oh,
You're
yeah.
probably very intentional with what you're putting together, and you probably have a lot of hope that whoever receives it feels the love, the celebration, the
Mm,
specialness of what they're receiving. So again, I kind of go back to that question of how do you how do you navigate all of that of it
mm,
being you, but then there's the business, but it's all woven together.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's so nice that I finally have a place to like put all my running stuff because I feel like on my personal, it's people, don't care, right? I mean, it's not as inspiring necessarily to just my community of normal people. I don't know what to say about that, but it's like now I have a place to put all my workouts, to put all my running stuff because I know how much inspiration I get from people that post about how their workout was, what they did today. Like, and I know that what I share could also be inspiring to somebody. So it's like, okay, this is nice. Like we can all hold each other accountable. We can all inspire each other and we all love running. So great. This is perfect. So I loved being able to put my running stuff like to the Athlete Bouquets account. But then it's like, okay, this is a business, Allie. So you got to make sure you're also like selling what you're selling. But I also know, you know, myself, it's like I don't want to follow an account that's just going to post pictures of their products. Like that's not, I mean, okay, fair enough, but that's not inspiring or that interesting. Like some of it is. So I've tried to find this balance of, and now I have a podcast too. So it's like, okay, now there's this balance of those three things, right? It's me, it's my running journey, it's my what I'm going through as a human, combined with here are these cool gifts that I make, and then combined with here are other people's stories that I'm sharing. All kind of with the end goal of being inspiring in some way, right? Whether that's to somebody who is trying to get better at the sport of running, who's just a runner themselves, who wants to hear inspiring stories, I don't know, or who's, looking to lift up another runner who needs that. So it's hard because I haven't really figured it out. And you know this as somebody who posts on Instagram. It's like, who knows? I don't know what they want from me anymore. It's like, do you want me to make videos? Do you want me to post static content? What do you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
So, there's always that piece of it. But I try to just kind of have this balance of just all those facets of what I do are shown through that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard because again, like one of the things I do is I teach yoga. And I'm like, I really don't share much yoga on there. Like, I mean, every now and then I posted something recently. So I'm like, okay, cool. There's something yoga related there. But even then, it's not, it's not a lot. Like my Instagram account started, if anyone dives through all the posts, very much so sharing a lot of yoga poses, yoga challenges, yoga around the
Mm,
city, like all of that. And I was running, I was doing other things, but it was very much so, I feel like a yoga Instagram account. And then somewhere for other reasons, I stopped sharing as much of the yoga stuff. And then I started sharing more of the running. And now I'm in this weird space of, well, what do I even share? Like, what do I share? So I've gotten to a point where I think my rule is really just share whatever you want to share. And because for me it's a little bit different in that the product that I'm selling, it is getting me as your run coach or hiring me as
Mhm.
as a yoga instructor. So it's either you like my words and how I communicate and the message that I'm sharing, or you don't, or whatever the case is. But it's still one of those things of, do I do a static post? Do I do a reel? Do I focus on my stories? Like what do I do? And then when I do that, what am I trying to tell people? And I mean, even today, my post today, because I was running and just had, when I run, I'm sure it's the same with you. It's like, oh, all these thoughts come through and I'm running and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's the message I want to share of basically why are we, for me in general, where it's like, okay, can we define ourselves more broadly as runners and not just so much by times or paces or even the
Yeah.
specific races that we're doing. But that's very much so a reflection of where I'm at right now, where I'm trying
Mhm.
to just figure out this sport. And through that, it's through the podcast, I'm trying to figure out different ways to be a runner. I think that's in general where I'm at right now, where it's like, how else can I be a
Yeah.
runner without doing the running thing? So I want to just take a few minutes now to
Mm.
um have you tell us about your podcast and how that came about.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I have a podcast called Finish Lines and Milestones. So the name actually is the tagline of Athlete Bouquets. So when I started Athlete Bouquets, the tagline I created was celebrating finish lines and milestones. And the milestones piece of it really was tied to Peloton in particular, actually, because I love Peloton. But it was also like, okay, you might not be like running a race and crossing a finish line. Like your milestone might be something different, whether it's like a milestone in a class or becoming a mom or, whatever that might be for you. So I my sister actually was the one who encouraged me to start the podcast because I'd been talking about it and I have listened to podcasts for a long time and I've kind of always wanted to do it. I am an introvert at heart, which a lot of people find surprising, but I don't necessarily get energy from people, but I am very social. So anyway, people are often surprised by that. But I wanted to share stories. And I actually, for a number of years, was a part of this organization where I live in Indianapolis called Linking Indie Women. So I helped
Mm.
share, we had monthly events where we would share a story of an inspiring woman in our community. And there were all different kinds of women stories that we shared. And so the same thing I wanted to apply to running. Like every runner has a story about how they got into running, why they run, different pieces of their life. And I just find it so fascinating to get to just get to know people and why they run. I mean, I've met people like in random places, like in the airport, and I've had them on the podcast. And it's so fun because you're like, you've run 75 marathons. I need to know why and how the heck you did that. So it's just really been so fun. There is no monetary aspect to it at all. I use it kind of to point back to athlete bouquets, right?
Mhm.
And but otherwise it's just building. I also just like to build community. So, when I was in tech, I networked a lot. Like I got to know so many people in our community. Same with Linking Indie Women, where I got to know so many amazing women in our community. And now same goes for the running community here. I'm also lucky enough to be on the board of the CNO Monumental Marathon, Indianapolis Monumental Marathon. And so that's another of piece of it. But yeah, I just love the community. And this runners are incredible. And so it's the highlight of my week getting to talk to somebody. And I'm sure you feel well, I'm sure today is the highlight of your week, Stephanie. It's not what I meant to say, but it's like these conversations are so fun and just it's the highlight of my week, getting a chance to talk to somebody and learn more about them and what inspires them and why they run and what goals they're chasing or not. to your point, like what different areas and like, how are you trying to enjoy running without thinking about just PR, PR, PR? Like, I think that's interesting too. So yeah.
Yeah. I listen, anytime I have these conversations, I fall more in love with running. And
Yes.
every time I speak to someone, I'm like, this is so every time I have a conversation with a lady, I finish and I'm like, I'm so glad I get to exist at the same time as you do. Like that for me, these
Yeah.
conversations are that of like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm taking up space when you're taking up space. And how friggin' cool is that? But I want to circle back to something because I find that everything you're doing is very much so like technology based because a podcast is technology. I mean, when I first did when I decided I wanted to do this as a podcast, I remember texting everyone and I'm like, I'm not a tech person. How am I figuring this out? And every time I upload an episode and get it all done and create the graphics, I'm like, yes, Steph, good job. Like, I don't consider myself a tech person at all. And this podcasting stuff is so outside of my comfort zone when it comes to
Mm,
technology. So I just kind of wanted to point that out that like for people like me, everything you're doing is so tech heavy because we're talking about even now as you were speaking when you're talking about the podcast, I'm like, oh, but you're connecting an online community of runners, right? Like this podcast reaches the ears of people beyond our inner circle, and technology is
mhm.
making that possible. Phones, computers, like it's all making
Yeah.
that possible. And there's to kind of go back to what we talked about earlier too, like there's an invisible labor that goes into this, right? There's
Mm,
the uploading the podcast, listening, editing the podcast, creating graphics,
mhm.
promoting the
Mhm.
podcast. Like there's a lot that goes into a podcast. Like I try to tell people, I'm like, for every 1 hour, like it may be a 1 hour conversation that we're having, but it
Mm,
ends up being at least 3 hours of work in totality, right? Like
mhm.
between recording the podcast,
Mhm.
listening, if you're editing, if you're doing other
Yep.
things, if you're linking the podcast to your website, that drives me insane. Where
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, this stuff is so hard.
Yeah.
Like linking everything
Yeah.
together so that everything circles back to one another blows my mind. So if
Yeah.
you have an easy time with that, I just want to like give you snaps and celebrate you in that because for me, my brain hurts thinking of how I try to keep up with everything. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
It's like I find that you are using technology so you're using it when it comes to running, and perhaps that's different than what you grew up seeing, but it's still very much so present in all that you're doing. And
Yeah.
you're doing quite a bit.
You should know though, Stephanie, it's not easy for me either as a tech person. So that just then gives you all the snaps echoed back, because for somebody who's not a tech person, being able to figure it all out and make it work is huge. Because yeah, it's hard for me even sometimes. My goodness, because things aren't easy. They should be, but they're not.
They're not. They're listen, I really do breathe this like just sigh of relief whenever I get one of these podcasts uploaded and it actually publishes on the day that I wanted to publish. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many little things that I'm like, no,
Yeah.
why did I think this it's it's easy in that I have a rhythm to it, but it's not easy in that I
Right.
completely understand all of it. So, um I want to thank you for sharing all of that. And I've got three final questions for you. So, question number
Okay.
one, and we can kind of do it rapid fire ish. So, question number one is just if you can remind us where to find you or follow you.
Mm. Yes. So on Instagram, I am athlete bouquets. So learn how to spell bouquets, I guess. I don't know if I can do it offhand. Bouquets, bouquets, athlete bouquets. And then my personal Instagram is Ally, Ally. T as in tango, and then Brett, which is just the first few letters of my last name, Brett. not the whole shebang. So, and then of course you can find my business at athletebouquets.com.
All right. What do you have coming up that we can celebrate you in?
Ooh, okay. So my next finish line is going to be in Vegas next February, end of next February. I'm going back for redemption because I did the half, it's a rock and roll half 2 years ago, and it was a really rough race for me. And it's hard because it's at night, like run the strip at night is kind of the big thing. And it was really hard. So I bought U2 tickets for the night before, so I'm sure that'll make it a great race. But yeah, that'll be fun to celebrate. Hopefully a better race than I had the first time. Hopefully I learned something about fueling for an evening race, but if anything, it's going to be a blast.
Yeah.
I get to go with my dad. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And listen, night races or just any race scene or running that you're doing outside of what's normal is incredibly challenging. And it's, I wish you all the fun, not the luck, but just
Thank you.
all the fun with that.
Fun.
All right. Final question is, I think, kind of a two-parter question in terms of, let me just say what the question is. All right. So final question is, what final words do you have for us? But also, in those final words, if you had to pitch running to someone, how would you pitch it to them?
Okay. Ooh, gosh, that's good. So yeah, the final words, this will come out in January, right? January is such a weird month for people because, at least for me, it feels so overwhelming having to like feel like you need to plan out your whole year and make goals and do vision boards or whatever. Do what is best for you. I do not do that. I do not sit down and make a bunch of goals. I have in the past. To me, it's more stressful and overwhelming. So do what you want to do. Do dry January. Don't do dry January. Like just do what makes you happy and run the mile you're in, right? And selling running, man, I've tried to do this to one of my best friends for years. Like I still haven't gotten her. But, I just think running makes me feel like I can do anything. And it makes me the best version of myself. And that sounds so corny, but it is so true. And I know that runners listening will be like, yep, yeah, I get it. But if you're not a runner, like that's what I would say to you. Like it makes me feel invincible, especially on a good day.
I couldn't agree more. We're going to leave it at that. Everyone, thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Yes, thank you.